Hi, this is Michael Bitzer. I'm a professor of politics and history at Catawba College in Salisbury, North Carolina, and I'm here with another political quick take on third-party fascination in 2024, particularly as it relates to North Carolina, but also what we might be seeing nationally. In North Carolina this week, we saw the news that the Robert Kennedy independent presidential bid secured enough petitions, potentially, to be on November's ballot as a political party. Now, this is important for North Carolina because third parties, if you are running as a political party, have a lower threshold than if a candidate was simply putting forward an independent bid to be on the ballot. So we'll have to wait and see what the North Carolina State Board of Elections does in terms of the review of all the signatures. But if Kennedy is going to be on the ballot, we also got news this week that the No Labels Party was not going to field a presidential ticket. And this is also important because in North Carolina, No Labels was recognized as a political party. Now, what we have seen in North Carolina politics about third parties is typically there's all sorts of interest in it early on, but once it comes to November's elections, the performance of third parties generally tends to fail. And what I've done is gone back to the 2000 presidential election and looked at what the percentage of third parties, along with write-in votes, constitute in terms of the total percentage of votes being cast. And what we see from 2000 to 2004 to 08 is basically less than 1% of all the votes cast in North Carolina's general election for president came to third parties and write-in ballots. In 2012, we saw a slight increase to about 1.25% of the total ballots cast. But in 2016, it was a fairly unique anomaly. In that election, third parties and write-ins got 4% of the total vote cast. But in 2020, that number dropped down to about 1.5%. And I think that this spike in 2016 is indicative of what we saw nationwide in terms of the interest of third parties. And I think the important thing to recognize with this national dynamic is that we have to think about the strength of partisan identification, going from strong partisans to not very strong partisans to independents who lean to one political party over the other, along with the pure independents. And this study from 2016's American National Election Survey looks at the partisan identification by strength and then who did they vote for in terms of the presidential choices. And we see among the strong partisans, no real surprise that 95 and 97% of the strong partisans tended to vote for their political party's presidential candidate. When you got into the not very strong partisans, about 3/4 of them voted for their party's presidential candidate, but you see the third party rising up from 1-2% among strong partisans to 7 and 9% among the not very strong partisans. When you get into the independents who lean to one party over the other, they oftentimes are just as partisan as their brethren who identify with a political party, but also note that the third party strength has increased as well, up to double digits, 12% and 11%. Here's where I think the real test of third parties will come into play among the pure independents. And in 2016, with discontent about both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, you saw almost 1/4 of the pure independents vote for a third party. Now, when we get into 2020's presidential election, you'll notice again a kind of standard strong partisans voting overwhelmingly for their respective presidential candidate. Among the not very strong partisans, Democrats were more loyal to Joe Biden. Among not very strong Republicans, that dropped to 80% voting for Donald Trump. 20% of them defected and went to Joe Biden. But you'll notice among the partisans, third parties are fairly non-existent. When you move into the independent leaners to one party over the other, again, a very strong showing among independents but lean Democratic. But among the independents but lean to the Republican Party, much like their not strong brethren in terms of Republican identification, almost 80% of them voted for Donald Trump, but 15% defected to Joe Biden. And if you look at the third parties, 4% and 6% between the independent lean Democratic, independent lean Republicans, those numbers dropped significantly from 2016. Where you see the biggest impact was indeed among those who are pure independents. In 2016, they were almost a quarter of the vote going to third parties. In 2020, that number dropped in half, down to 12%. So what might this mean for North Carolina and nationally? I think here in North Carolina, we have to think about how much of a percentage will all of the third parties, so Constitution, Green, the Libertarian Party, and now if Kennedy's party gets on board, do they basically pull between 1% and maybe as high as 4% with disaffection among the two major parties, with Biden and with Trump? I think we'll have to kind of think about where their total falls into between 1% and potentially as high as 4%. But that makes a critical point because North Carolina's victories tend to be within the 1 to 2% margin. We'll just have to wait and see how November plays out and where the strength, particularly among the partisan identifiers, or is it much more among the pure independents who tend to go third party in this November's general election? Thanks for watching.